crack of a hand against a cheek echoes louder than the orchestra. In the glittering ballroom of the Pierre Hotel surrounded by New York's elite, one woman stands frozen, a fiery handprint blooming on her skin. All she did was her job. All she did was exist. The whispers start like a hiss, a social execution in progress. She's nobody, a ghost at the feast, and her public humiliation is the evening's entertainment. She braces for the final blow, the one that will shatter what's left of her dignity. But then a voice cuts through the silence, cold as steel and heavy, with absolute power. It's a voice everyone in the room recognizes, and a voice nobody ever dares to cross. And what he says next will bring the entire glittering charade to a dead stop. The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of money and lilies. Valentina Hollis felt like she was breathing in a different atmosphere from the rest of the world, a rarefied oxygen reserved for those whose net worth was spelled with at least 9 zeros. As a junior event manager for Opulence and Grace, one of New York's most exclusive event planning firms, her job was to be invisible. A ghost in a black dress, ensuring the champagne flutes were never empty and the canapes were always warm. Tonight was the pinnacle of the social season, the annual Starlight Foundation Gala. It was a sea of designer gowns, bespoke tuxedos, and the kind of jewelry that could single-handedly fund a small nation. Valentina moved through the throngs of people with practiced ease, her earpiece a discreet, flesh-toned bug, whispering instructions from her boss, a perpetually stressed woman named Genevieve. Valentina checked on the delegation from the Dubai consulate, table 12. They look parched, and for God's sake, try to look like you belong here, not like you're about to shoplift the silverware. Valentina murmured a "Yes, Genevieve," and adjusted her path. She didn't need the reminder. She was acutely aware of the chasm between herself and the guests. Her black dress was a clever find from a consignment shop on the Upper East Side. Her shoes were sensible flats hidden by the gown's length, and the single pearl necklace she wore was a gift from her mother. Real but modest. It was her only connection to a life that felt a million miles away, a life where she was caring for that same mother through a grueling, expensive illness. This job, with its long hours and demanding clientele, was the only thing keeping them afloat. Her eyes scanned the room, a professional habit. She saw the mayor schmoozing with a tech mogul. She saw a famous actress laughing with a director. And then she saw her, Victoria Davenport. Victoria was everything Valentina was not. She was the heiress to the Davenport Industries fortune, a sprawling conglomerate with its fingers in everything from real estate to private equity. Her dress was a cascade of crimson silk that probably cost more than Valentina's yearly salary. Her laughter was loud and brittle, designed to draw attention, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were currently fixed on Valentina with undisguised contempt. There was a history there, though Victoria would likely not even remember it. Years ago, before her father's business had collapsed and her mother had gotten sick, Valentina had attended a summer program for gifted art history students at Yale. Victoria had been there too, not for the art but for the social credential. Valentina had outshone her in every seminar, her passion and knowledge a stark contrast to Victoria's bored indifference. The resentment had festered, culminating in Victoria using her father's influence to get Valentina's final project disqualified on a baseless plagiarism charge. It had been a minor petty cruelty, but it had stung. It had been Valentina's first real taste of how the other half lived and how they fought. Valentina forced herself to look away, focusing on her duties. She made her way to table 12, ensuring the guests had their champagne refreshed. As she turned to leave, a waiter carrying a tray of ruby-red cocktails, the evening's signature drink, the Starlight Kiss, was jostled by a passing guest. He stumbled, and Valentina, with the quick reflexes of her profession, reached out to steady him. But in the process, a single glass tipped. Time seemed to slow down. The crimson liquid arced through the air in a perfect, horrifying parabola, landing directly on the pristine white sleeve of Victoria Davenport's fiancé, a blandly handsome man named Carter Wells. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. Victoria shot to her feet, her face a mask of theatrical fury. "You clumsy idiot," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the sophisticated buzz of the room. The orchestra seemed to falter. The waiter, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, was pale with terror. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry I was pushed. I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses," Victoria snapped, turning her venomous gaze from the waiter to Valentina. And you're one of the planners, aren't you? I should have known. You have an aura of incompetence about you. Valentina stood tall, her heart pounding against her ribs. Years of training in de-escalation kicked in. Miss Davenport, on behalf of the staff, I sincerely apologize. It was an unfortunate accident. If you'll allow us, we can have Mr. Wells's jacket tended to immediately by an expert cleaner we have on standby. Her calm professional tone seemed to infuriate Victoria even more. It was as if she wanted a scene of fight and Valentina was refusing to give it to her. An accident, Victoria laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I saw you. You've been staring at my fiancé all night. I know your type. A little nobody trying to get her hooks into a man with money. Did you think spilling a drink on him would be your meet cute moment? The accusation was so absurd, so baseless, that Valentina was momentarily stunned into silence. The whispers around them grew louder. People were turning their phones subtly angled to capture the unfolding drama. This was blood in the water. That is completely untrue, Valentina said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. I was only trying to help. Victoria stepped closer, her $5,000 dress rustling with menace. She was now inches from Valentina, invading her personal space, forcing Valentina to crane her neck back slightly. You've done nothing but get in the way. You don't belong here. You're a stain on the evening, just like this drink is a stain on this jacket. She looked at Carter, who just stood there looking awkward and useless. Then her eyes snapped back to Valentina. Her lips curled into a vicious sneer. Someone needs to teach people like you their place. And then it happened. With a sharp cracking sound that seemed to silence the entire ballroom, Victoria Davenport swung her hand and slapped Valentina hard across the face. The force of it snapped Valentina's head to the side. A burning, stinging pain erupted on her cheek. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The room fell into a dead, absolute silence. The orchestra stopped playing entirely. Every eye in that vast, opulent space was on her, on the red handprint that was surely blooming on her skin. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes judging, pitying, and worst of all, enjoying the spectacle. Humiliation, hot and suffocating, washed over her. She was frozen, a statue of shame in the center of the gilded cage. Victoria looked triumphant, her chest heaving, a cruel smile on her face. She had won. She had publicly executed the nobody. Valentina squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for what would come next. The firing, the blacklisting, the utter ruin of her professional life. But what came next was not what anyone expected. A voice low and resonant cut through the oppressive silence. It was a voice that carried an unmistakable weight of command, a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. That's enough. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A man was walking towards them, his stride unhurried, but filled with a lethal purpose. He wasn't the biggest man in the room, but his presence seemed to suck all the air out of it. He wore a tuxedo tailored with surgical precision. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face was a study in controlled intensity, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to see everything. It was Alexander Hawthorne. If the Davenports were old money, Alexander Hawthorne was a force of nature. A self-made billionaire who had built a global tech and logistics empire, Hawthorne Industries, from nothing. He was known for his ruthless business acumen and his intensely private nature. He rarely attended social events, and when he did, he was an object of both fear and fascination. To be the target of his anger was to face financial annihilation. Victoria's triumphant smirk faltered. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Alexander, she said, her voice suddenly losing its sharp edge. This is a private matter. This little waitress got clumsy. Alexander didn't even look at Victoria. His gaze was fixed on Valentina, on the red mark on her cheek. A muscle in his jaw clenched, the only sign of the fury brewing beneath his icy composure. He reached them, stopping directly in front of Valentina, effectively shielding her from the gawking crowd. He gently tilted her chin up his thumb, brushing near the edge of the red mark, a touch so light it was barely there. For the first time that night, Valentina's composure shattered. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her other cheek. Alexander's eyes, when they finally moved to Victoria, were terrifying. They were chips of ice, devoid of any warmth. I said, he repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet growl that was somehow more frightening than a shout. That's enough. Victoria took an involuntary step back. She was out of line. She has no right. She has every right. Alexander interrupted, his voice a blade of cold steel. He took another step forward, placing himself between Valentina and Victoria, a formidable, unmovable wall. He looked directly at Victoria, his gaze unwavering and filled with a promise of retribution that made the air crackle. And then he said the 5 words that would detonate a bomb in the heart of New York's high society. "Touch my wife again," he said, the words dropping like stones into the silent pool of the ballroom, "and you will lose everything." The silence that followed Alexander's declaration was different. It was no longer the silence of shocked observation. It was the silence of utter reverberating disbelief. The word wife hung in the air, electric and impossible. Alexander Hawthorne, the city's most powerful and elusive bachelor, was married to her. The event planner, the nobody whispers, erupted like wildfire. Phones which had been subtly filming were now held aloft brazenly. This wasn't just a society scandal anymore. This was a headline story. Victoria Davenport's face went from pale to ashen. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that had been cracked. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her fiancé, Carter Wells, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Alexander ignored them all. He ignored the hundreds of eyes, the frantic murmuring, the dawning realization on the faces of the city's biggest power players. His entire focus was on Valentina. He shrugged off his impeccably tailored tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else, something uniquely him, a scent that was both comforting and achingly familiar to her. "Let's go," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. He placed a firm protective hand on her lower back and began to guide her away. The crowd a moment ago, a suffocating wall, parted for them, as if by magic. No one dared to get in their way. No one dared to even meet Alexander's eyes. As they walked toward the exit, Valentina could feel the tremors running through her body. She was vaguely aware of Genevieve, her boss, standing near the door with a look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. Valentina couldn't process it all. The slap, the humiliation, the rescue, the reveal. It was a dizzying, terrifying kaleidoscope of emotions. Alexander's security detail, 2 large men in dark suits who had been standing impassively by the entrance, materialized at his side. One of them spoke into his wrist. "Mr. Hawthorne is leaving. Have the car ready at the 59th Street entrance. No press." They swept through the lobby, a bubble of silent, intimidating power. The doorman scrambled to open the door for them. A sleek black Audi A8 with tinted windows was waiting at the curb, its engine purring. One of the security guards opened the rear door, and Alexander gently guided Valentina inside before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, shutting out the world. Inside the car, the silence was absolute. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows, but they were in their own self-contained universe. Valentina huddled in the corner, clutching Alexander's jacket around her. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching hurt and a profound sense of dread. Their secret, the one they had guarded so carefully, was out. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have done that." Alexander turned to her, his face softening as he took in her pale, tear-streaked face. The fury he had shown in the ballroom was gone, replaced by a deep, simmering concern. "I should have done more," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out his fingers, gently tracing the outline of the red mark on her cheek. "Did she hurt you?" "It's not the slap," Valentina said, pulling away slightly. "It's this, all of this. Everyone knows. It's over." "What's over us? Our life. The quiet, the peace. The one thing I asked for, the one thing you promised me, was that you would protect me from that world, and you just threw me to the wolves." The accusation hung in the air between them. He flinched as if she had been the one to slap him. "Protecting you," he said, his voice low and intense, "is exactly what I was doing. Did you want me to stand there and let her humiliate you? Let her put her hands on you and do nothing? I would have handled it. I would have been fired, and it would have been awful, but we would still have been safe." Anonymous. Now I'm Alexander Hawthorne's secret wife. Do you have any idea what my life is going to be like tomorrow? The paparazzi, the society pages, the people who hate you coming after me. Victoria was just the beginning. He sighed a heavy, weary sound. He ran a hand through his hair. I know, you're right. But Valentina, when I saw her hand connect with your face, I couldn't think. All I could see was red. All rational thought went out the window. To understand his reaction, one had to understand their story. It hadn't begun in a boardroom or at a gala. It had begun 5 years earlier in the hushed, dusty aisles of the New York Public Library's main branch. Valentina had been a graduate student buried in research for her art history thesis. He had been just Alex, a driven but not yet stratospheric tech entrepreneur, taking a break from a coding marathon. He'd approached her asking a simple question about a reference book. That question had turned into a coffee, which had turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything from Renaissance art to the ethics of artificial intelligence. They had fallen for each other fast and hard. For 6 blissful months, they were just Alex and Liv exploring the city, sharing cheap pizza in her tiny apartment, and dreaming of the future. He never spoke of the scale of his ambition, and she never asked. She was in love with the man, not the myth he was about to become. But then his company, Hawthorne Industries, had its explosive IPO. Overnight, Alex became Alexander Hawthorne, the billionaire titan. His face was on the cover of Forbes and Wired. His life became a whirlwind of meetings, global travel, and immense pressure. The simple, quiet world they had built was shattered. The threats, both corporate and personal, became very real. A rival had his car run off the road. A disgruntled ex-employee tried to break into his penthouse. He realized that anyone associated with him, especially someone he loved, would become a target. With a heavy heart, he had broken it off. He told her it was for her own safety, that he couldn't drag her into his dangerous new reality. The breakup had shattered them both. For 4 years, they lived separate lives. Valentina finished her degree, but her family's fortunes collapsed when her father's small firm went bankrupt, a casualty of a ruthless market maneuver by a larger corporation. Then came her mother's diagnosis. She took the job with opulence and grace, putting her dreams on hold to pay the mounting medical bills. Then 6 months ago, fate had intervened. At a small private fundraiser for the hospital where her mother was being treated, she saw him across the room. Older, more powerful, with an air of loneliness about him that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the 4 years of separation vanished. They started talking again, tentatively at first, then with all the old urgency. He told her he had never stopped loving her, that breaking up with her was the biggest regret of his life. He had spent the last 4 years building a fortress around his empire, neutralizing threats and making himself untouchable. He could protect her now, he swore. She believed him. She had never stopped loving him either. But she had one condition. She didn't want the life of a billionaire's girlfriend. She didn't want the publicity, the scrutiny, the gilded cage. She just wanted him. So 2 months ago, they had done the unthinkable. They flew to a small, quiet town in Connecticut and got married at a local courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses. It was their secret, a shield against the world. They lived a bifurcated life. To the world, he was Alexander Hawthorne, the bachelor billionaire. To her, he was Alex, her husband, who would sneak into her modest Queens apartment late at night after his security had been dismissed, just to hold her. It was a fragile, precious piece, and tonight he had smashed it to pieces with 5 words. Back in the car, the silence stretched. Finally, Alexander reached into the interior pocket of the jacket she was wearing. He pulled out his phone. "This wasn't an accident, Valentina," he said grimly. "What do you mean the waiter was pushed?" The waiter was pushed by a man named Paul Norris, a low-level corporate security guy for Davenport Industries. Valentina stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I had my team do a facial recognition scan on the security footage from the ballroom the second I saw what happened. Paul Norris was positioned perfectly to jostle the waiter at the exact moment he was passing your table. This was a setup from the beginning." The pieces started to click into place in Valentina's mind. Victoria's immediate disproportionate rage, her pre-planned venomous accusations. It wasn't just petty revenge for a slight at Yale. It was a calculated move. But why? Valentina asked, her voice trembling. Why would they do this? Alexander's face was grim. He swiped through something on his phone before showing the screen to her. It was a series of encrypted emails and financial documents. "Robert Davenport," Alexander said, tapping his finger on the screen. "Victoria's father. For the past 6 months, he's been attempting a hostile takeover of Hawthorne Industries. He's been buying up stock through shell corporations trying to get enough shareholder influence to force a vote and oust me. A takeover. Valentina was floored. Hawthorne Industries was a behemoth. The idea that anyone could attack it seemed impossible. He's desperate, Alexander continued. Davenport Industries is a dinosaur. Old money, old tech. They're bleeding cash and they're on the verge of collapse. My logistics division is their direct competitor, and we're crushing them. Acquiring my company is his only way out. He's been failing, so he's moved on to a new tactic, destabilization. He looked at her, his gray eyes dark with a terrible understanding. He's been digging into my private life, looking for a weakness, a pressure point. He must have had a PI following me. They found you, Liv. They found my one weakness. The reality of it hit Valentina with the force of a physical blow. The slap hadn't been about a spilled drink. It had been a strategic corporate attack delivered by Victoria on behalf of her father. The goal wasn't just to humiliate her, it was to humiliate him, to provoke him to make him look unstable and emotional in front of the city's most influential people, to create a scandal that would spook his shareholders. They were using me. Valentina whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. They were using me to get to you. Yes, Alexander said, his voice laced with cold fury. They were, and by slapping you, they declared war, not on Hawthorne Industries, on me. And by revealing our marriage, I just accepted the terms of that war. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. You said I threw you to the wolves? You're wrong. I just showed the wolves that you're not a sheep. You're a hawthorn, and the hawthorns bite back. The car pulled to a stop, not in front of her modest Queens apartment, but in a private, subterranean garage. Alexander led her to a private elevator, which opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment with panoramic views of Central Park. This was his fortress, the place she had never been, the life she had never wanted. As she stepped out onto the cool marble floor, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was home, but she was in a stranger's palace. Her quiet life was over. The war had begun, and she was standing unwittingly at the very center of the battlefield. The next morning, the world exploded. Valentina woke up in a guest room in Alexander's penthouse that was larger than her entire apartment. The first thing she saw was the stack of newspapers his assistant, a frighteningly efficient woman named Ms. Finch, had left on the bedside table. Her face was on the front page of every single one. The New York Post had the most sensational headline: "The Billionaire's Cinderella waitress slapped at gala is secret wife of mogul Alexander Hawthorne." There were grainy photos of the slap of Alexander's furious face of them leaving the hotel. Her phone, which she'd left on silent, had hundreds of missed calls and thousands of notifications. Reporters had somehow found her number. Old friends she hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, and Genevieve from Opulence and Grace had left a dozen voicemails alternating between panicked apologies and desperate pleas to understand what was going on. It was exactly the nightmare she had envisioned. She felt exposed, stripped bare for the world to see. Alexander found her staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the tiny yellow cabs move like insects down below. He was already dressed in a sharp suit, a phone pressed to his ear. "No, I don't care about the stock fluctuation. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Get our legal team ready. I want a full dossier on every board member of Davenport Industries by noon. And get me everything on their subsidiary Davenport Fine Arts. Everything." He hung up and turned to her. "How are you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I feel like an exhibit at the zoo," she said without turning around. "And what was that about Davenport Fine Arts?" "It's one of Robert Davenport's pet projects, a boutique art dealership and investment firm. On paper, it's a passion project. In reality, my team thinks it might be one of the shell corporations he's using to launder money to fund the takeover. It's his weakest link, but the finances are an ironclad maze. We can't find a way in." Valentina turned around, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Davenport Fine Arts," she repeated slowly. The name was familiar, not from the business pages, but from her past life, her academic life. "I know them. They made a big splash a few years ago. They acquired the Celestini collection." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "The what collection?" "The Celestini collection." Valentina explained, the old fire of the scholar beginning to burn in her eyes. It was a legendary, almost mythical private collection of late Renaissance and early Baroque sculptures, assembled by an Italian count in the 18th century. It was thought to be lost after World War II. When Davenport Fine Arts announced they had acquired it and were brokering private sales, it sent shockwaves through the art world. It's the crown jewel of their portfolio. The provenance was said to be impeccable. Provenance, the history of ownership, Valentina clarified. It's the single most important factor in valuing a piece of high-end art. It proves it's not a fake or looted. For the Celestini collection to be legitimate, it would need a documented, unbroken chain of ownership all the way back to the Count. Alexander was listening intently now, a new kind of respect in his eyes. This was her territory. My team's financial analysts have hit a brick wall trying to prove financial misconduct, he said. The paper trail is perfect. Too perfect. Or actually, financial analysts are looking at the numbers. Valentina said, a sudden fierce energy coursing through her. They're not looking at the art. Let me see the acquisition records. Let me see the provenance documents they filed. For the first time since the slap, Valentina felt a flicker of her old self. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just the billionaire's wife. She was a scholar. She had a skill, a deep knowledge that his army of lawyers and accountants didn't. She could fight back. Alexander saw the shift in her instantly. He led her to his home office, a stunning room lined with dark wood and cutting-edge technology. With a few keystrokes, he brought up a secure file on a large monitor. This is everything my intel team could get on Davenport Fine Arts. The public filings for the Celestini acquisition are in here. For the rest of the day, Valentina was in her element. Alexander canceled his meetings and sat with her, watching in silent fascination as she worked. She wasn't the timid woman from the gala anymore. She was a hunter on the trail. She cross-referenced names, dates, and locations from the provenance documents with historical archives, auction records, and her own extensive knowledge. She muttered to herself, "No, that can't be right. The Duke of Suffolk died in 1887. He couldn't have sold the sculpture to a Parisian gallery in 1892. This seal from the Rothschild estate? The wax color is wrong for the period." The hours bled together. Alexander had food brought in, but she barely touched it. By late evening, she leaned back in the chair, her eyes tired but alight with triumph. "I've got it," she whispered. Alexander leaned forward. "What is it?" "It's a fraud," Valentina said, her voice ringing with certainty. "The entire Celestini collection. It's a masterful, brilliant, and utterly convincing fake. Not the art itself, the sculptures are likely real period pieces. The story is the fake." She pointed to the screen. Davenport's people have created a flawless provenance. They've woven a history for these sculptures, connecting them to the lost Celestini collection. They forged letters, auction receipts, and estate documents from the last 200 years. It's a work of art in itself, this forgery. They've used it to inflate the value of these otherwise moderately valuable sculptures into the stratosphere. We're not talking about a 50% markup. We're talking a 10,000% inflation. Alexander's eyes narrowed. And with that inflated value, he can use the collection as collateral for massive loans, Valentina finished for him. Loans he's using to buy my husband's company. It was the smoking gun. A crime not of spreadsheets and wire transfers, but of history and ink and paper. A crime only she could have uncovered. "How do we prove it?" Alexander asked, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "There's one document here," Valentina said, zooming in on a grainy image of an old handwritten letter. "It's supposed to be from the Count's curator, a man named Lorenzo Vesari, dated 1788. It's the cornerstone of the entire provenance. The paper is period correct. The ink is iron gall ink, which is also correct. But look here." She magnified a section of the letter. "The handwriting, it's a perfect imitation of 18th century Italian script. But there's a specific quirk in the formation of the letter S. It's called the long S, which looks like an F. The forger used it correctly almost everywhere. But here in the word bellissimo, he used a modern short S. It's a tiny, almost unnoticeable slip-up. An anachronism. It's like finding a zipper on a Roman toga. The entire thing unravels from this one mistake." She looked at him, her face flushed with victory. "I can prove this letter is a fake. And if it's a fake, the entire collection's value is fraudulent. The loans are based on a lie. His entire takeover bid is a house of cards. Just then, Alexander's personal phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. Alexander Hawthorne, a smooth, condescending voice said. It was Robert Davenport. Davenport, Alexander replied, his voice like ice. I trust you had an eventful evening. Davenport said, a smug tone in his voice. Your new bride is making quite the splash. I do hope her cheek is feeling better. Victoria can be so passionate. Valentina flinched, the casual cruelty of the remark hitting her like a fresh slap. Get to the point, Robert, Alexander growled. The point, Davenport said, is that you're distracted, emotional. Your shareholders are nervous. My position has never been stronger. I'm calling a vote of no confidence at the emergency board meeting on Friday. By the end of the week, your company will be mine. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm offering you a way out, a very generous severance package. Walk away now and I'll call off the dogs. Your wife can go back to her quiet little life. No one has to get hurt. It was a threat, plain and simple. Go after me and I'll go after her. Valentina looked at Alexander, her heart pounding. She saw the war in his eyes, the instinct to protect her versus the instinct to fight. She reached out and placed her hand over his on the desk. He looked at her, and she gave a firm, determined nod. Alexander's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth at all. It was the smile of a predator that had just seen its prey walk into a trap. Thank you for the offer, Robert, Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm. But I won't be needing it, and I'd advise you to check the guest list for Friday's meeting. I'm bringing a +1. She's an art historian, and she has a presentation I think you'll find illuminating. He hung up the phone, cutting off Davenport's stunned silence. The gauntlet had been thrown down. Friday was the day of the battle, and Valentina Hollis, the invisible event planner, the secret wife, was now their most powerful weapon. Friday dawned not with the gentle glow of a new day, but with the sharp, clinical light of a final judgment. The sky over Manhattan was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within the city's corporate heart. The emergency board meeting for Hawthorne Industries was set for 10 a.m., and the financial world was buzzing with the electric tension of a prize fight. Pundits on every news channel had already cast their votes, and the consensus was grim. Alexander Hawthorne, the untouchable titan, had been rendered vulnerable by emotion. Robert Davenport, the old wolf, had him right where he wanted him. In the sun-drenched silence of the penthouse, Valentina felt a strange and profound calm settle over her. It was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. 2 days ago, she had been a ghost in a black dress, flinching at every sharp word. Now she was a woman preparing for battle. She thought of the stinging humiliation at the gala, the feeling of being worthless and exposed. The memory no longer made her want to shrink. It fueled a cold, clear fire within her. This was not just for Alex. This was for the woman who had been slapped for the scholar, whose work had been stolen for the daughter fighting for her mother's life. This was reclamation. She chose her outfit with the deliberate care of a soldier dressing her armor. A navy blue sheath dress, simple, severe, and impeccable. It spoke of substance, not flash. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, low ponytail. It was a style that said, I have nothing to hide. Her only adornment was her mother's single pearl necklace. As she fastened the delicate clasp, she felt the familiar cool weight against her skin. It was more than an heirloom. It was a talisman, a connection to her mother's quiet, unyielding strength in the face of a far more terrible foe than Robert Davenport. Alexander stood by the door to the master suite, already clad in a charcoal suit that seemed to sharpen his every line. He didn't speak, just watched her. There was no trace of the frantic protector from the night of the gala. The panic had been replaced by a deep, steady current of trust that flowed between them, silent and absolute. He had seen her work, had witnessed the scholar emerge from the chrysalis of the event planner, and he was in awe. Ready, he finally asked, his voice low and even. Valentina met his gaze in the mirror. She saw not a damsel to be rescued, but the partner he was relying on. Let's go end this, she said, her voice imbued with a certainty that was all her own. The descent into the public eye was jarring. As their Audi purred to a stop before the gleaming edifice of Hawthorne Tower, They were met by a roaring sea of media. Reporters, photographers, and cameramen swarmed the entrance held back by a taut line of security. The moment the car door opened, the air exploded in a blinding blitz of camera flashes and a cacophony of shouted questions. "Mr. Hawthorne, is it true? Your shareholders are abandoning you. Mrs. Hawthorne, what do you have to say to accusations that your marriage is a sham? Is the Hawthorne empire about to fall?" Alexander's arm came around her waist, a solid grounding presence. Valentina felt a tremor of her old fear, the instinct to duck her head and hide. But then she felt the cool pearl against her throat. She took a slow, deliberate breath, fixing her eyes on the massive steel H over the building's entrance. She let the noise wash over her, filtering it out, focusing only on her purpose. She held her head high, her expression a mask of serene composure, and walked with her husband into the heart of his kingdom, ready to defend it. The boardroom on the 80th floor was a temple of power. One wall was pure glass, offering a godlike view of the world below. A long, monolithic table of polished obsidian reflected the cold light surrounded by the 12 board members of Hawthorne Industries. These were not merely wealthy individuals. They were architects of the modern economy, their faces etched with the gravity of their influence. At the far end of the table, holding court, as if he already presided, there sat Robert Davenport. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit extravagantly tailored. He exuded an aura of predatory satisfaction. Beside him, a specter at the feast was Victoria. She wore a severe black dress, her face a pale mask of defiance, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. She had come to witness a coronation. She seemed to be sensing she might be at an execution instead. A loaded silence fell as Alexander and Valentina entered. Every head turned, every eye fixed on Valentina. She could feel their collective assessment, a palpable wave of skepticism and curiosity. They saw a beautiful young woman, a former event planner, the center of a scandal. They saw a liability. They had no idea they were looking at their salvation. Alexander strode to his seat at the head of the table, a king returning to his throne. Valentina took the chair directly to his right, a position of unmistakable importance. She placed her tablet on the obsidian surface and folded her hands calmly upon it. Davenport leaned forward, his lips curling into a patronizing smile. "Alexander, I'm glad you could make it. I called this meeting because of a grave concern for the stability and public image of this company. Your recent erratic behavior has the market spooked. It's a matter of fiduciary duty. Save the faux concern." Robert Alexander cut in, his voice as sharp and cold as the glass around them. "You've been trying to stage this coup for months. Let's get to the vote. I believe you think you have the numbers to oust me." Davenport's smile widened. He was savoring this. "I do. The shareholders I represent, who now constitute a significant voting bloc, feel a change in leadership is required to protect their investment from your personal dramas. An investment funded by fraud." Alexander stated the words, dropping into the tense silence like ice chips on glass. A nervous murmur rippled around the table. Davenport's smile tightened at the edges. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Those are baseless, slanderous accusations. A desperate move from a desperate man." "Are they?" Alexander countered smoothly, gesturing with an open hand towards Valentina. "My wife, Valentina Hawthorne, has something to share with the board. For those of you who only know her from the gossip columns, allow me to clarify. Before her recent work in event management, Mrs. Hawthorne was a leading scholar in Renaissance art history with a specialization in provenance verification." Valentina. This was her moment. Valentina stood her movement fluid and confident. She felt a dozen pairs of powerful eyes lock onto her, heavy with doubt. With a tap on her tablet, the large monitor at the end of the boardroom flickered to life. "Good morning, members of the board," she began, her voice perfectly modulated, calm, clear, and authoritative. "I'm here to talk about value. Not perceived value or market value, but true value. Specifically, the value of the assets being used by Mr. Davenport as collateral for the 9-figure loans funding his acquisition of Hawthorne stock." An image of a magnificent marble sculpture, an angel weeping into its hands, appeared on the screen. This is the Weeping Angel, the showpiece of the so-called Celestini collection, owned and brokered by Davenport Fine Arts. It's currently valued on their books at $80 million. She clicked again, and a complex document filled with spidery script appeared beside the sculpture. This valuation is predicated entirely on this provenance, which claims an unbroken chain of ownership back to an 18th century Italian count. However, this provenance, the very soul of the artwork's value, is a masterful and comprehensive fabrication. Robert Davenport shot to his feet, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. This is outrageous, an absolute farce. This woman is not an accredited appraiser. She has no standing here. This is a boardroom, not a university lecture hall. Valentina didn't even look at him. Her gaze found Eleanor Vance, the formidable head of a multi-billion-dollar pension fund, whose face was a mask of stern neutrality. Ms. Vance, your fund manages the retirement savings of over 500,000 people. You more than anyone understand that entire fortunes rest on the integrity of an asset's valuation. Do you not? Eleanor Vance's eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed slightly. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. The floor is yours, Mrs. Hawthorne. Please continue. The implicit permission silenced Davenport. He sat down heavily, fuming. For the next 20 minutes, Valentina held the room captive. She was no longer a junior event manager or a society wife. She was a master of her craft, a forensic historian dissecting a lie. With surgical precision, she dismantled the Celestini collection's legitimacy. She brought up the cornerstone document, the supposed 1788 letter from the curator, Lorenzo Vasari. The forger's work here is exceptional, she explained, zooming in on the script. The paper is period-correct rag paper. The ink is iron gall ink, which analysis would confirm. But a forger's greatest challenge isn't materials, it's habit, the unconscious muscle memory of their own time. She magnified a single word. Here, the letter S's. Throughout the 18th century, the long S, which resembles a lowercase f, was used in the middle of words. The forger uses it correctly almost everywhere. But in this word, bellissimo, his modern habit slipped. He used the short modern S we all use today. It is a tiny, almost invisible slip, but it is as definitive as a fingerprint. It proves unequivocally that this letter was written in our time, not in 1788. A wave of understanding passed through the room. This wasn't a vague accusation. This was proof. Valentina pressed her advantage, moving through the evidence relentlessly. She cross-referenced bills of sale with historical shipping manifests proving sculptures were on different continents from where they were supposedly sold. She showed how a family seal on a wax stamp belonged to a line that had died out 50 years before the document was dated. She exposed forged signatures by comparing them to known authentic correspondence. Robert Davenport's blustering faded to a choked silence. Victoria beside him seemed to shrink into her chair, her face a canvas of dawning horror. She had wanted to see Valentina humiliated. Instead, she was watching her father be systematically dismantled by a woman she had dismissed as nothing. Valentina saved her conclusion for the final devastating blow. The entire Celestini collection, which Mr. Davenport's financial backers have accepted as collateral, valuing nearly $500 million, is in fact a collection of lovely but unattributed period sculptures. Their true combined market value is likely less than $5 million. This means the loans are fraudulent, the stock purchases are fraudulent. Mr. Mershari, Davenport's entire position in this company is built on a house of cards on a lie written in forged ink. She turned off the screen, and her gaze, no longer calm, but blazing with cold fire, settled on Robert Davenport. The woman he had tried to break had just broken him. Into the stunned, dead silence, Alexander's voice cut like a diamond drill. The Securities and Exchange Commission was briefed on my wife's preliminary findings an hour ago. The FBI's art crime team has already been dispatched to the offices of Davenport Fine Arts with a warrant. I believe they'll find your accounting practices illuminating. It was over. Robert Davenport didn't just look defeated, he looked annihilated. He slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out ruin of a man. The fight, the smugness, the power, all of it had evaporated, leaving only the pathetic reality of a common criminal. Eleanor Vance stood, her expression hard as granite. I believe Mr. Davenport's position is no longer tenable. I call for a vote of full and unwavering confidence in our CEO, Alexander Hawthorne. All in favor, every hand in the room shot up. It was swift, unanimous, and brutal. The war was won, leaving the Davenports to the chilling silence and the impending arrival of federal agents, Alexander guided Valentina out of the boardroom. In a quiet alcove overlooking the sprawling city, he stopped and turned to her. His eyes, usually so controlled, were filled with an emotion that struck her to the core, a mixture of love, relief, and profound, unadulterated awe. I have faced down corporate raiders, government inquiries, and men who would have happily put a bullet in me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I have never ever seen anything like what you just did. You didn't just fight Valentina. You dissected him. You took his entire world apart piece by piece with nothing but your mind. He saw me as a pawn in his game against you, she replied, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He never imagined the pawn had a mind of her own. You built the fortress, Alex. I just showed you where the real attack was coming from. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the secret, hurried kiss of their stolen nights. It was a kiss in the full light of day, in the heart of his empire, a kiss of triumph and partnership. It was a public declaration, more powerful than any headline, a silent acknowledgement that she was not standing behind him or beside him, but with him as his equal in every way. Hand in hand, they walked towards the elevator, leaving the wreckage of an old dynasty behind them. Their life would be different now, public, scrutinized, and complex. But as the elevator doors slid shut, enclosing them in their shared victory, Valentina felt no fear. She was not a secret. She was not a victim. She was Valentina Hawthorne, and for the first time she understood the true power that came with that name, a power she had earned herself. And so the story that began with a moment of public shame in a glittering ballroom ended in a quiet triumph in a glass-walled boardroom. Valentina Hollis, the woman who was slapped and scorned, proved that true power isn't about the money you inherit or the name you carry. It's about the strength you find within yourself, the courage to use your unique gifts, and the power of a partnership built on love and mutual respect. Alexander didn't just save his wife saved him, and together they saved each other. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale of a prince rescuing a damsel, but a modern love story about two equals who faced down a world of callous and deceit and won. They proved that the most formidable weapon is a brilliant mind, and the greatest victory is the hollisome to finally truly be yourself. What did you think of Valentina's incredible transformation? Which twist in the story surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories about hidden strengths and dramatic triumphs, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for listening.